The sun blazed over Zirath Prime, its crimson light glinting off the polished obsidian towers of the imperial capital. Citizens of every known galactic species thronged the Grand Avenue, their excited chatter rising like the buzz of insects. Today marked the Empire's 500th cycle of expansion, 5 centuries of bringing order to the chaotic fringes of the universe. General Varkoth stood on a raised dais of black marble, his scaled skin shimmering with ceremonial oils. 8 feet tall with a commanding presence, he surveyed the masses with the confidence of one who had conquered a dozen solar systems. His amber eyes narrowed as he lifted a clawed hand, silencing the crowd with a simple gesture. "Citizens of the Eternal Empire," his voice boomed through amplifiers, echoing between the towering monuments to imperial glory. "Today we celebrate not merely our past conquests, but our continued dominion over the lesser species who remain unworthy of our grand civilization." The crowd roared its approval, a symphony of different vocal appendages creating a unified sound of superiority. Varkoth's expression shifted into what passed for a smile among his kind, a predatory baring of needle-sharp teeth. His gaze fixed on something in the distance. Beyond the atmospheric shields that protected the capital, tiny moons, barely visible against the vast emptiness of space. "Look there," he continued, pointing dramatically toward the distant satellites. "The human colonies, primitive dwellers who scurry like vermin across moons we deem too insignificant to harvest." His voice dropped to a theatrical whisper that the amplifiers nonetheless carried to every ear. "They believe themselves independent. They imagine themselves civilized." Laughter rippled through the audience, first nervous, then growing in confidence as Varkoth himself joined in the mockery. "Primitives," he proclaimed, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Unworthy even of subjugation, let them play at governance while real power, true civilization, continues its inevitable march across the stars." The crowd's response was deafening, their xenophobic pride stoked to new heights by their beloved general. None seemed to notice the lone figure standing perfectly still amid the celebration, Captain Mira Solen. The human envoy sent to observe the imperial festivities as a courtesy that was in reality another form of humiliation. Mira's face revealed nothing, her olive complexion marked only by a slight tightening around her eyes. At 5'8", she was dwarfed by most of the imperial species, yet her posture remained ramrod straight, hands clasped behind her back in formal military rest. Her dark hair was pulled into a severe bun, emphasizing her angular features and the intelligence burning in her gray eyes. Lieutenant Kai Rhodes, her second in command, leaned slightly toward her ear. Unlike his captain, Rhodes wore his emotions plainly. Disgust and anger fought for dominance on his face. "They have no idea what they've just done," he whispered, voice barely audible over the continued cheering. Mira's lips barely moved as she replied, "Pride before the fall. Lieutenant, always." Rhodes glanced around at the ostentatious display of imperial might, the towering war machines, the psychic amplifiers that projected feelings of awe into the crowd, the sentient AI governors floating on gravity disks. "What if the greatest power lies not in what we show," he mused, "but in what we hide?" A ghost of a smile touched Mira's lips. "Indeed, Lieutenant, and we've hidden so very much." The Empire stretched across 17 major star systems, encompassing over 200 inhabited worlds and countless mining operations on moons and asteroids. Its structure was rigidly hierarchical, the High Chancellor and Imperial Senate at the pinnacle, followed by military commanders, planetary governors, regional administrators, and finally, the countless citizens sorted by species, ability, and usefulness. What had begun as a coalition of 3 spacefaring races had evolved over 5 centuries into a behemoth that consumed rather than incorporated. New species were not welcomed as equals but categorized. Useful ones became labor forces, dangerous ones were neutralized, and insignificant ones were allowed to exist on the fringes, like humans. The Empire flaunted its technological superiority at every opportunity. Their ships were colossal constructs of living metal that responded to the thoughts of their pilots. Their weapons included planet-cracking cannons that could shatter a world's crust, sending continents adrift into space. Their cities featured self-regenerating architecture, atmospheric manipulation, and planetary shields that could repel asteroid strikes. Meanwhile, the human fringe worlds appeared primitive by design, scattered across forgotten moons and asteroids beyond the Empire's primary trade routes. Human settlements looked like struggling outposts from the outside, ramshackle structures cobbled together from salvage, outdated solar collectors, visible water reclamation systems that suggested desperation rather than efficiency. The truth, however, lay beneath the surface. Literally, humans had learned early that visibility meant vulnerability. After their homeworld, Earth, had been devastated in the Empire's early expansion, deemed a necessary example to discourage resistance. The survivors had adapted. They built downward and inward, creating vast underground complexes within moons and asteroids. They developed technology that emitted minimal energy signatures, making their true population and capabilities invisible to Imperial scan. Most importantly, they cultivated patience. For 3 generations, humans had played the role assigned to them, backward tribal survivors. Too insignificant for conquest, too primitive for respect, all while their hidden infrastructure grew, their reverse-engineered technology advanced, and their resolve hardened like diamond under pressure. The stakes were existential. If the Empire discovered humanity's deception, they would face not subjugation but extinction. The Imperial doctrine was clear. Species that demonstrated deception were deemed evolutionarily dangerous and removed from the galactic equation. Dozens of civilizations had already disappeared into that bureaucratic euphemism. But for humanity, the alternative, eternal subservience and slow cultural death, was equally unacceptable. They chose a third path, to hide their strength until the moment was right, to study the Empire's weaknesses from within, and to prepare for a day when primitive would become liberator. That philosophical gamble now rested primarily on the shoulders of Captain Mira Solen, 42 years old. Mira had not been born into her role as humanity's face to the Empire. She had begun as an archaeologist, specializing in pre-contact Earth cultures. When Imperial ships darkened Earth's skies, she had been cataloging ancient Mayan artifacts in a remote dig site. She escaped the initial bombardment but witnessed the aftermath. Entire continents rendered uninhabitable. Billions dead in what the Empire classified as a minor pacification action. The trauma transformed her. The studious academic became a strategic mastermind, combining her deep understanding of how civilizations rise and fall with an unquenchable drive to ensure humanity's survival. She volunteered for the most dangerous mission, to enter Imperial space openly, to be the tamed human that the Empire could mock while she gathered intelligence from within. For 15 years, she had played this role perfectly, swallowing insults while memorizing defense codes, accepting humiliation while mapping supply routes, smiling politely while identifying the critical weak points in the seemingly invulnerable Imperial infrastructure. The Empire believes technology equals civilization, she often told her crew. Our advantage is that we know better. General Varkoth commanded the Empire's 7th Armada, 30 capital ships and their support vessels. Born into the warrior caste of the Zirathian founding species, he had risen through ranks by combining battlefield brutality with political acumen. His obsidian scales and imposing height made him physically intimidating. But it was his tactical mind that had earned him his position. Varkoth genuinely believed in the Empire's civilizing mission. In his worldview, order was the highest virtue, and the Empire brought order to chaos. If lesser species suffered in the process, that was merely the natural law of the universe asserting itself. His honor code was strict but entirely self-referential. He would never break his word once given, but saw no moral contradiction in subjugating lesser beings who existed outside his ethical framework. His fascination with humans was almost scientific. He found them curious specimens, adaptable yet seemingly complacent, intelligent yet technologically stagnant. He enjoyed showcasing Captain Solène at Imperial functions, pointing out her species' shortcomings with the casual cruelty of someone discussing an interesting insect. Admiral Thrin served as Varkoth's second-in-command, a position she had held for 12 years. Unlike her superior, Thrin came from one of the Empire's incorporated species, the Larathi, mammalian beings known for their caution and analytical minds. Her fur bore the silver markings of middle age, and her six-fingered hands were rarely still, constantly adjusting equipment or analyzing data on portable screens. Where Varkoth saw the universe in terms of strength and weakness, Thrin saw patterns and anomalies. And lately, the human colonies had been producing subtle anomalies that troubled her. Energy fluctuations that defied explanation, supply requisitions that didn't match their reported population, and communication patterns that suggested a far more complex social structure than their primitive appearance indicated. "We may be underestimating them," she had cautioned Varkoth recently. The general had laughed. "One cannot underestimate what barely registers. Admiral, focus on real threats." But Thrin's unease continued to grow. Dr. Rhea Johnson worked in shadows even darker than most of humanity's secrets. Chief engineer and reverse technology specialist, she had transformed captured Imperial tech into humanity's greatest hope, the Ghost Network. 50 years old, with hands perpetually stained with machine oil and hair gone prematurely white from radiation exposure. Rhea was brilliant, impatient, and haunted by the enormity of her responsibility. "We get one chance," she often muttered while working. "One chance to rewrite this story." Her greatest achievement remained hidden in artificial asteroid fields and the cores of dead moons, a fleet of ships that used the Empire's own technology against it. The ghost ships ran on modified Imperial cores but emitted no traceable energy signature. They could slip through Imperial security nets, disable rather than destroy, and vanish before counterattacks could be launched. Imperial Chancellor Elara Voss had ascended to her position through a combination of political maneuvering and genuine administrative talent. Cold, calculating, and utterly devoted to Imperial expansion. She viewed human worlds as future resource extraction sites once the current harvest cycle was complete. When reports of General Varkoth's public mockery reached her, she saw not a diplomatic misstep, but an opportunity to channel Imperial citizens' xenophobic tendencies into support for her more aggressive expansion policies. "Let the general play his games with these primitives," she told her advisory council. "Their humiliation serves our greater purpose." None of them recognized that they were speaking of their eventual downfall. The day after the parade, General Varkoth summoned Captain Mira to the observation deck of his flagship, the inevitable Dominion. The massive vessel hung in geosynchronous orbit above the capital, its 2-mile length casting a shadow across the planet's surface that Imperial citizens considered a comforting reminder of protection rather than the symbol of oppression it represented to subjugated worlds. "Captain Solène," Varkoth greeted her with exaggerated courtesy. "I trust you enjoyed yesterday's festivities?" Mira bowed precisely the correct depth for her status. Deep enough to show respect, shallow enough to maintain dignity as an envoy. "The Empire's achievements are most impressive." "General," Varkoth circled her slowly, his clawed feet clicking against the polished floor. "I've been reviewing the status of your settlements, particularly the moon you call Dawn's Rest." Mira's expression revealed nothing, though internally her mind raced. Dawn's Rest was one of humanity's most important hidden bases. Its surface appearance as a struggling mining colony concealing vast underground manufacturing facilities. "A humble outpost, General, but it serves our needs." "Indeed." Varkoth stopped before a holographic display and expanded it with a gesture. Curious, then, that our long-range scans have detected unusual energy fluctuations beneath its surface. Nothing significant, of course, perhaps merely faulty equipment. Your people do struggle, sir, with maintaining even basic technology. The mockery was clear, but so was the implied threat. Imperial scans had detected something, not enough to reveal the truth, but enough to warrant investigation. "We would welcome any technical assistance the Empire deems appropriate," Mira offered, knowing the response this would trigger. As expected, Varkoth laughed. "The Empire does not waste resources on technical charity. Captain, however, to ensure these fluctuations pose no risk to nearby Imperial interests, I have ordered a precautionary measure." He expanded the hologram further, showing a tactical display. "A blockade. 3 destroyers will establish position around Dawn's Rest by tomorrow. Merely a safeguard. You understand." It was a provocation, plain and simple. A demonstration of power meant to reinforce humanity's helplessness. In previous years, Mira would have accepted the humiliation, offered appropriately grateful platitudes for the Empire's protective concern, and reported back to human leadership about this latest indignity. But times had changed. The waiting game was over. "The Empire's concern for safety is commendable," Mira said evenly. "If I may be excused, I should inform my government of this development." Varkoth waved a dismissive hand. "Of course, I'm sure your leaders will respond with appropriate submission." Mira bowed again and departed. As soon as she reached the secure confines of the human embassy, a deliberately modest building on the outskirts of the capital, she activated a quantum entanglement communicator disguised as an outdated computer terminal. "Authorization Prometheus," she stated clearly. "Execute Nightfall Protocol." Across 17 human settlements, hidden commanders received the coded message. The response was immediate and perfectly choreographed. As Imperial destroyers moved into position around Dawn's Rest, their sensors detected nothing unusual, just the expected energy signatures of a struggling mining colony. The destroyers established their triangular blockade formation, effectively cutting off the moon from any transport or communication. Admiral Thrin, monitoring the operation from a secondary command ship, frowned at her display. "Energy readings are inconsistent with previous scans," she noted. "There's a harmonic distortion in the—" Before she could complete her observation, space itself seemed to ripple around the destroyers, where there had been empty vacuum. 7 vessels materialized, smaller than the Imperial ships but sleek, with an organic quality to their design that mimicked Imperial aesthetics while incorporating distinctly human elements. "Impossible," Thrin whispered as her instruments struggled to lock onto the ghost ships. Each time her targeting systems identified a vessel, it seemed to fade from one location and reappear at another, as if reality itself was glitching around them. The Imperial destroyers attempted to raise shields, but the ghost ships had already launched their first attack. Not missiles or energy weapons, but complex electromagnetic pulses precisely calibrated to the frequency of Imperial shield generators. One by one, the massive destroyers went dark. Their systems temporarily paralyzed by technology they had believed no primitive species could possibly possess. Within minutes, the entire blockade force floated helpless in space. Life support and artificial gravity still functioning, but weapons, propulsion, and communication completely disabled. A transmission cut through the electronic silence, broadcast simultaneously to the disabled ships and to every Imperial communication channel, including the direct feed to General Varkoth's flagship. Captain Mira Solen appeared on screen, now dressed not in the humble attire of a diplomatic envoy, but in the midnight blue uniform of the Human Defense Force, silver insignia gleaming at her collar. "General Varkoth," she spoke calmly, as if they were continuing their earlier conversation. "The people of Dawn's Rest thank you for your concern regarding our energy fluctuations. As you can see, they were indeed caused by faulty equipment, yours." Varkoth's roar of rage echoed through his command center as he watched the unthinkable unfold. Human vessels, technologically advanced human vessels, neutralizing Imperial warships without firing a single lethal shot. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. His composure shattered. Mira's expression remained serene. "Simply a demonstration. General, you spoke yesterday of primitives unworthy of respect. We thought a practical example might clarify where true primitiveness lies, not in the appearance of simplicity, but in the arrogance that prevents you from seeing beyond it." As she spoke, the ghost ships began methodically attaching tether beams to the disabled destroyers, pulling them into a new formation, one that, when viewed from the planet's surface, created a distinctly human symbol, a phoenix rising from flames. "Your ships and crews will be unharmed," Mira continued. "Power will return in approximately 12 hours, by which time we will be gone. Consider this a diplomatic response to yesterday's insightful comments about our civilization." The transmission cut off, leaving Imperial command centers in chaos and citizens on Zerath Prime looking up at the impossible sight of their vaunted navy, rearranged like toys by a species they had been taught to ridicule. Chancellor Voss, informed of the incident within minutes, immediately recognized its significance. This was not a random act of defiance. It was a carefully orchestrated statement, one that threatened not merely military pride, but the very foundation of Imperial control, the belief in absolute technological superiority. "Find them," she ordered her Security Council. "Find them and eradicate them. This cannot stand." But finding the ghost ships proved impossible. They vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared, leaving the Empire with disabled vessels and wounded pride, the opening move in a conflict unlike any the galaxy had witnessed before. The weeks following the Dawn's Rest incident saw an escalation that Imperial strategists struggled to categorize. This was not warfare as they understood it. There were no pitched battles, no territory claimed, no resources seized. Instead, human ghost ships materialized across Imperial space in seemingly random patterns, each appearance a surgical strike against Imperial infrastructure. On Dorseth 4, a mining hub critical to the Empire's production of quantum stabilizers, workers arrived to find all their equipment rearranged into enormous sculptures depicting human historical figures. Production halted for 11 days. At the Helix Nexus, the Empire's primary communication relay station, operators discovered their transmission protocols rewritten. For 6 hours, every Imperial message, regardless of content, was preceded by Varkoth's recorded voice declaring humans primitive before normal transmission resumed. 3 labor colonies, where conscripted species toiled under harsh conditions, found their containment fields suddenly deactivated. By the time Imperial security forces arrived, the workers had vanished, transported away by ghost ships that Imperial sensors never detected arriving or departing. Each incident was bloodless but devastatingly effective, targeting not lives but the systems of control and the narrative of superiority that sustained the Empire. And each was accompanied by the same message, broadcast across Imperial channels, from the primitives, with respect. General Varkoth's fury grew with each new humiliation. His initial disbelief had hardened into obsession. He commanded round-the-clock surveillance of all known human settlements, only to find them continuing their appearance of primitive struggle, with no evidence connecting them to the sophisticated attacks. "They must have allies," he insisted during War Council meetings. "Some other species must be providing them with this technology." Admiral Thrin, reviewing scan data from the ghost ship encounters, shook her head. "The design aesthetics are unmistakably human. General, but the technology, it's ours. Modified, improved even, but fundamentally based on Imperial engineering principles." "Impossible." Varkoth dismissed her. "They couldn't have reverse-engineered our technology to this level. We've monitored their development carefully." "Have we?" Thrin questioned. "Or have we monitored what they wanted us to see?" The question hung uncomfortably in the air. Imperial doctrine had no framework for addressing an enemy that had hidden its true nature for generations. Their tactics were designed for crushing open resistance, not countering shadow warfare from a supposedly subjugated species. Varkoth eventually resorted to the only approach he truly understood: overwhelming force. He ordered a full-scale retaliatory strike against Earth's sector, marshalling 3 battle fleets to converge on the scattered human colonies with orders to pacify any resistance. The offensive launched with imperial precision, hundreds of warships transitioning from hyperspace simultaneously, surrounding the primary human settlements in a display of force meant to terrify the primitives into submission. What they encountered instead defied imperial military doctrine. The seemingly vulnerable human outposts revealed hidden defense systems that emerged from lunar regolith and asteroid cores. Not the crude weaponry expected of a fringe civilization, but highly sophisticated countermeasures specifically calibrated to imperial attack patterns. Sensor jamming fields prevented targeting locks, gravitational disruptors threw missile trajectories off course. Shield harmonics adapted in real time to imperial energy weapons. The imperial fleets found themselves not crushing an inferior enemy, but engaged in a frustrating dance with opponents who seemed to anticipate their every move while remaining just beyond effective striking range. They knew we were coming, Admiral Thrin realized, watching the tactical display with growing unease. Not just that we were coming, but exactly how we would attack. The imperial offensive ground to a stalemate, with minimal human casualties and imperial commanders unable to explain their failure to make meaningful progress against targets that, according to all official records, should have fallen within hours. Aboard her command vessel, hidden within the hollow core of a seemingly abandoned asteroid, Captain Mira coordinated the defensive action while wrestling with growing ethical concerns. The plan was working, perhaps too well. The Empire was being humiliated, its military might rendered ineffective without a single human-initiated attack. But Mira understood the psychology of wounded pride better than most. Humiliation without bloodshed was still humiliation, and imperial doctrine demanded escalation in response to continued defiance. "We're provoking them towards something worse," she confided to Lieutenant Rhodes as they reviewed casualty reports, thankfully still showing 0 human deaths and only minor injuries. "Varkoth won't accept defeat. He'll escalate to planet killers if we continue this course." Rhodes studied the tactical display, where Imperial forces were regrouping for another assault. "The alternative was slow extinction. Captain, we've hidden as long as we could. The Ghost Network is as ready as it will ever be." "I know," Mira sighed. "But I fear the cost to innocent Imperial citizens. Most of them truly believe they're part of a civilizing force. They don't know what their leaders have done in the name of order." Her gaze drifted to a secure terminal that connected directly to Dr. Janssen's hidden facility. "Perhaps it's time they learned." The decision was made. Phase 2 would begin ahead of schedule. On Sireth Prime, citizens gathered in public squares to watch the latest Imperial news broadcasts, expecting reassurances about the swift defeat of the human uprising. Instead, their screens suddenly shifted to an unfamiliar symbol, a stylized human hand holding a torch. "Citizens of the Empire," began a calm female voice, Captain Mira's, though few would recognize it. "What you are about to see has been hidden from you by those who claim to act in your name." The broadcast shifted to archival footage. Imperial forces deploying biological weapons against the Threllan civilization, a peaceful species whose only crime had been refusing Imperial mining rights on their sacred grounds. The footage showed Threllans dissolving from within as engineered viruses liquefied their organs. Men, women, and children collapsing in public squares, remarkably similar to those where Imperial citizens now stood watching. More footage followed, the orbital bombardment of Elos Prime, a world whose artistic achievements had once been legendary across the galaxy. The systematic enslavement of the Kardeshi, a species whose philosophical writings had advanced understanding of quantum consciousness. The deliberate triggering of an ice age on Valar 3 because its inhabitants had developed shield technology that might someday rival Imperial defenses. The broadcast continued relentlessly, showing atrocity after atrocity, each authenticated with Imperial encoding that proved these were not fabrications but actual Imperial records, the Empire's own dark archive of secrets deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. "This is civilization?" Mira's voice asked as the footage ended. "This is the order your taxes fund, your children fight for, your leaders celebrate? We humans have been called primitive. Perhaps we are, but we have not forgotten the difference between advancement and atrocity." The broadcast concluded with a simple statement. "These records are now being transmitted to every communication device in Imperial space. The truth can no longer be contained. What happens next is your choice." Imperial security forces scrambled to block the transmission, but the damage was done. The carefully maintained narrative of Imperial benevolence lay in ruins, replaced by questions that could not be easily answered and images that could not be unseen. On world after world, Imperial citizens took to the streets, some in protest, others in confusion, many simply demanding explanations from leaders who had never expected to be held accountable. Admiral Thrin watched the growing unrest with a sense of inevitability. The patterns had been there all along, for those willing to see them. Humanity had not just been hiding its technological development, it had been collecting evidence, building a case against the Empire in a court of public opinion that Imperial leadership had never considered relevant. After reviewing the latest projections of civil disturbances, Thrin made the most difficult decision of her career. She transmitted her resignation from Imperial service, along with a detailed analysis of why the conflict with humans could not be won through conventional means, and departed on her personal vessel with a small staff of like-minded officers. 3 days later, her ship appeared at the edge of human space, broadcasting a single message: "I seek asylum and offer information in exchange for sanctuary." Captain Mira, authorized to make first contact decisions, personally met with the defector. The two women, so physically different yet united by their understanding of what unrestrained power corrupts, spoke for hours in a secure facility beneath the surface of Dawn's Rest. "Why come to us now?" Mira finally asked. Thrin's fur rippled in what humans had learned was an expression of deep emotion. "Because you showed mercy," she replied. "You could have killed those destroyer crews. You could have bombarded our worlds with the same weapons used against yours. Instead, you chose to reveal truth and let our people decide. That is, civilization." The Admiral provided critical information, access codes to Imperial security networks, details of fleet movements, and most importantly, the location and operational specifics of the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Annihilator Array, a massive orbital platform capable of directing focused stellar energy to destroy entire star systems. "Chancellor Voss has ordered its activation," Thrin explained grimly. "General Varkoth commands the defense fleet. They plan to make an example of your primary settlements." The Human War Council convened immediately, faces grave as they assessed this existential threat. The array represented exactly the kind of overwhelming force they had hoped to avoid confronting directly. Their ghost network was designed for precision strikes and strategic deception, not head-on assaults against the Empire's most heavily defended weapon. Dr. Janssen, joining via secure hologram from her hidden facility, outlined their options in her characteristically blunt manner. "We can't match their firepower, but we might be able to redirect it." Her plan was audacious. Instead of attempting to destroy the array, they would commandeer it, using their understanding of Imperial technology to override its targeting systems and redirect its immense power against the Empire's own command fleet staging yards. The energy discharge would destroy their military leadership and primary assault vessels in one stroke. She explained, the Empire would collapse from the top down. Lieutenant Rhodes, studying the projected casualties, looked up with concern. The discharge would also create a radiation wave that would hit 3 civilian worlds in adjacent systems. Millions of Imperial citizens who had nothing to do with these decisions. A heavy silence fell over the council. This was the moment that would define not just the outcome of the conflict, but the soul of humanity's resistance. Would they become what they fought against? Would victory achieved through mass civilian casualties be victory at all? Mira stood, her decision made. We adjust the plan. We don't target their command fleet. We target the array itself, specifically its reactor core. We capture it, detach it, and send it into their logistics hub. The radiation will be contained, the damage limited to military infrastructure, but their ability to wage war will be crippled for years. It significantly reduces our chances of success, Dr. Janssen warned, and increases risk to our infiltration teams. Those are risks we accept, Mira replied firmly. We didn't hide and build and wait for generations just to become another empire. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. The plan was set in motion. Operation Nightfall would commence during the orbital eclipse of Zirath Prime's 3 moons, a rare astronomical event that would provide additional cover for the ghost ship's approach. In Imperial High Command, Chancellor Voss received reports of growing civil unrest with mounting frustration. The human revelation of Imperial atrocities had sparked something unexpected, not just protest, but reflection. Imperial citizens from core worlds to distant colonies were beginning to question not just specific actions, but the fundamental premise of Imperial expansion. This distraction is temporary, she assured her inner council. Once the Annihilator array demonstrates the consequence of defiance, order will be restored. Fear always overcomes conscience in the end. General Varkoth, assigned to the array's defense, was less certain. The humans had consistently outmaneuvered Imperial forces through unconventional tactics. Conventional defenses might not be sufficient against an enemy that specialized in appearing where they shouldn't be. Triple the security protocols, he ordered his staff. Any anomaly, no matter how minor, is to be reported directly to me. Despite these precautions, the human assault began exactly as planned, not with a frontal attack, but with infiltration. Ghost ships, their signatures masked by the electromagnetic interference of the eclipse, slipped through the defensive perimeter around the array. Special operations teams in adaptive camouflage suits that bent light around them moved through maintenance corridors and ventilation systems, placing quantum disruptors at key junction points throughout the massive structure. The disruptors activated simultaneously, creating localized fields that disabled security systems and created sensor blind spots. Through these carefully crafted gaps, the main assault team entered the array's command center. They encountered resistance immediately. General Varkoth had anticipated that the command center would be a primary target and had stationed his elite guard there, warriors from his own species, armed with neural disruptors and phase-shifted armor that conventional weapons couldn't penetrate. The fighting was intense and close quarters. Human soldiers, though physically smaller than their Zirathian opponents, used their knowledge of Imperial combat protocols to anticipate attack patterns. The battle raged through the circular command center, each side taking casualties as control panels exploded and emergency lighting cast everything in a bloody crimson glow. Captain Mira led a secondary team toward the reactor core, fighting through automated defense systems and security checkpoints. Her objective was not destruction, but control. They needed to isolate the core, override its safety protocols, and prepare it for detachment and targeted launch. 3 minutes to reactor access, she reported through her neural link. Status on command center. Heavy resistance, came the strained reply from her assault leader. Varkoth is personally leading the defense. We're holding, but cannot advance to the primary controls. The situation was deteriorating. Without control of both the reactor and the command center, the mission would fail. The array would fire as planned, and human civilization would end. It was at this critical moment that Admiral Thrin's contribution proved decisive. Having provided her authentication codes to the human forces, she remotely accessed the array's defense grid, one by one. The automated systems went offline, leaving only Varkoth's physical forces to maintain control. "What treachery is this?" the general roared, as his tactical display showed defensive systems failing throughout the structure. His amber eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. Thrin! With the automated defenses neutralized, the human assault team finally breached the inner command center. Varkoth, seeing his forces overwhelmed, ordered them to fall back to the reactor section, his last chance to prevent the humans from seizing control. Captain Mira's team, having just secured the reactor core, suddenly found themselves trapped between the advancing Imperial Guards and the volatile energy source they had come to capture. A firefight in the reactor chamber risked catastrophic overload. Exactly what they had come to prevent. "Hold position," Mira ordered her soldiers, stepping forward alone as General Varkoth entered the chamber with his remaining elite guards. The two leaders faced each other across the shimmering containment field of the reactor, human and Zerathian, each representing fundamentally different visions of what civilization meant. "You cannot win this, human," Varkoth growled, his clawed hand resting on his sidearm. "Even if you take this array, the Empire will build another. We will hunt your kind to extinction for this defiance." "Will they?" Mira asked calmly. "Your citizens are already questioning. Your allies are already defecting. This isn't about one weapon, General. It's about the story you've been telling. That might equals right. That technology equals advancement. That conquest equals civilization." She took a step closer, her weapon lowered. "We're offering a different story. One where diversity is strength, where ethics outweigh expansion, where mercy defines greatness rather than destroys it." Varkoth laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "Mercy is weakness. Human always has been." "Then kill me," Mira challenged, spreading her arms. "I'm right here. Show your strength." The general raised his weapon, targeting center mass. His finger tensed on the trigger and hesitated. This human had orchestrated the most effective resistance the Empire had ever faced. She had humiliated him personally, exposed Imperial secrets, turned his own people against their leaders. Yet she had never targeted civilians, had never executed prisoners, had never acted with the cruelty that Imperial doctrine considered necessary for control. Slowly, Varkoth lowered his weapon. "What happens now, human? Now we send this reactor into your logistics hub, not your population centers, not your command fleet, just the infrastructure that sustains your war machine. And then we talk, not as conqueror and conquered, but as species who share a galaxy." The general considered his options. The array was lost. The reactor would be repurposed regardless of his decision. And for the first time in his long military career, he found himself questioning whether continued resistance served any purpose beyond pride. "My surrender would have conditions," he stated formally. "Name them," Mira responded. "My soldiers receive honorable treatment. I stand trial before a mixed tribunal, not just humans. And you," he fixed her with his amber gaze, "you personally guarantee that Imperial civilians remain unharmed in whatever comes next. True strength lies in mercy, not annihilation." Mira quoted an ancient human philosopher. "I accept your terms, General." As the eclipse ended and light returned to Zerath Prime, the array's reactor was launched on a precisely calculated trajectory. It impacted the Empire's primary logistics hub, a massive space station where supply lines converged and command communications were routed with surgical precision. The explosion was contained but devastating, collapsing the Empire's ability to coordinate its vast forces or supply its extended military operations. Within days, Imperial governors across 17 systems found themselves effectively cut off from central authority. Many, reading the political winds and aware of the growing civil discontent, chose to surrender their emergency powers rather than face the consequences of continued association with a regime whose atrocities had been made public. Chancellor Voss, abandoned by her security detail, was placed under arrest by a coalition of imperial senators who had always privately questioned her more extreme policies but had lacked the courage to oppose them openly. General Varkoth, as agreed, stood trial before a newly formed galactic council consisting of representatives from both formerly imperial worlds and independent species. His testimony provided crucial insight into imperial decision-making and helped identify those most responsible for the worst atrocities. Dawn's Rest, once disguised as a primitive mining colony, emerged as a center for post-imperial cooperation. Its vast underground facilities were repurposed from manufacturing ghost ships to producing technology that could help heal worlds damaged by imperial exploitation. 3 months after the fall of the Annihilator Array, Captain Mira Solen stood on an observation platform overlooking the surface of Dawn's Rest. The artificial structures that had once created the illusion of primitive struggle had been removed, revealing the true face of human innovation: elegant, sustainable architecture that worked with the moon's natural features rather than dominating them. Lieutenant Rhodes joined her, now wearing the insignia of a diplomatic liaison rather than a military officer. "The Galactic Council has ratified the Charter of Mutual Recognition," he reported. 27 formerly imperial worlds have signed on, even some of the Sirathian colonies. Mira nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars. "And General Varkoth? Sentenced to help rebuild the worlds he once conquered. He accepted the judgment without appeal." A comfortable silence fell between them as they contemplated how much had changed in so short a time. The Empire, which had seemed eternal and invincible, had unraveled not primarily through force but through the exposure of truth and the power of a different vision. "Was it worth it?" Rhodes finally asked. "All those years of hiding, pretending to be less than we were, the risks we took?" Mira considered the question carefully. Humanity had achieved liberation, but not without cost. Many had died in the final assault. The galaxy's political landscape remained uncertain. Former imperial citizens struggled to redefine their identities without the structure the Empire had provided. There would be challenges ahead, perhaps even new conflicts as power realigned. "We could have fought them openly generations ago," she mused. "We might even have won through conventional warfare, though the casualties would have been catastrophic. But we would have simply replaced one empire with another. Instead, we changed the conversation about what power means." She turned to face her lieutenant, the weight of command visible in the new lines around her eyes, but also a sense of purpose that had sustained her through the darkest moments. "The universe doesn't need another species that excels at destruction. It needs civilizations that understand the strength in restraint, the power in connection, the advancement that comes from lifting others rather than conquering them." As night fell across Dawn's Rest, lights emerged from settlements that no longer needed to hide their true nature. Similar lights shone from worlds across the galaxy, some human, many not, but all now free to determine their own course without imperial oversight. A historian, documenting these events years later, would pose the philosophical question that defined this pivotal moment in galactic history. Were humans still primitive for choosing patience over immediate power? For valuing ethical constraints over expedient victory? Or had they simply redefined what true power means? The answer, like all profound truths, would be written not in proclamations but in the civilizations that emerged from empire's ashes, their choices, their values, and the stories they chose to tell about who they were and who they wished to become.